Hi, welcome to the third video of our series for creating task assignment system using Angular and .NET Web Core API. In the previous videos we explained the structure of our system and started creating our project. We implemented entities and DB context and created the database. In this video we will explain how to implement services and controllers, and we will cover these points. First we have to create the constants, then task service, employee service, task controller and employee controller. Now the constants that we need is constants required for pagination, which means when we want to get the list from the back end, we have to send some parameters. These parameters are first the sort, which means how we want to sort our data. We have the direction, which means based on ask or disk, and also we have the max result, which means the count of records we want to return, and page index, and more constants like the default sort, which is name, default sort direction, which is ask, and we need another constants like description and assignee. Next we have to implement a task service. In task service we have the following methods. We need assign tasks. In this method we have to assign task to an employee, so we need task ID and employee ID. We need also check task exist. In case we are sending task ID, we have to check that task ID is exist or not. We need also get task by ID. We send task ID and this is employee, which means if we want to include the employee and the returned object, which is the employee assigned to the task. Insert task to create a new task. Get all tasks. This will return the list of tasks which implemented using the pagination. As we can see, we have page size, page index, sort, direction and filter. And we see here the default parameters for this method: task constants, max result and page index, default sort and default sort direction. We have also get query, which is a private method, and we have get count, which is number of results, which made by the filter. Let's go back to our diagram. Now we have implemented the database. Now we have implemented the database, the DB context, which included entity framework to connect to the database. We implemented the entities and we included the entities inside DB context. Now we will have to implement the services, and also we implemented the models. Now, after we have opened our project, let's go to models, task models, and here we will create task const. Now all our constant variables will be created using const. Now let's start with default sort. This will be name. Default sort direction. This is ask. Description and assigning max result will be 10. Page index will be 0. Now we have created the task constants. Now let's move and create the task service. Now let's start creating the task service. As we know, we have the interface and which contains the signature, the methods, and we have the class which implements the interface. Now let's start creating the methods. As we saw from explanation of our methods, first let's start creating assign task. We have task ID and employee ID. Check task exists. We pass the task ID. Now insert task. Get task list. And for sort we have the default sort. For sort direction we have also the default sort direction, and the filter object, which is by default equals to null. And also we have get query, and we have this employee parameter. This is for eager implementation to return the employee or not. And the last thing, get count. Now we have created the method signatures. Now let's go and implement. Now before we move on with the task service, we have to implement some new methods for employee service. These methods are get employee by ID, check employee exist, and get all employees. So we need these first two methods to be used by task service. Now let's move on and create and implement. Okay, so now let's start implementing the employee service. We start with our signature methods. Okay, now get employee by ID. Check employee exist, now get all employees. Now let's implement these methods. So let's start with get employee by ID, but first let's inject DB context. Now we injected DB context. Okay, let's start with get employee by ID. Okay, now let's call this check employee exist. Okay, now last thing, here we have to check if we are returning the object or we are not returning anything. So if it's null, so it means that the employee is not exist, and we will return false. Now get all employees. Okay, now we have finished implementing the employees. Okay, so now let's complete implementing task service. Now we finished creating the method signatures. Now let's start implementing these methods. This is the task service. It should implement iTask service. Let's start with assign task. First we have to check whether this task ID exists and employee ID exists. Now let's call if not exist, check task exists and send task ID. If not exist, we throw exception. Task not exist. Now if task exists, we have to check from employee. If okay, before we start, let's inject DB context and employee service. Now we injected DB context and employee service, so let's complete our method. If not, here we have to check if employee ID is exist or not. Let's call employee service and check employee exists and send the employee ID. If not exist, we'll throw exception. Now if both exist, then we will map this task to this employee. First let's get the task. Get task by ID. We'll pass the task ID. We don't need to pass parameter for is employee because we don't need the employee. Now we have to assign this task to this employee. Now we call ppcontext.saveChanges. Here it's showing that maybe it's null, but we already checked that this is already exist. Now check task exist. We will implement this in the same way we implemented employee exist. Return get task by id not equals to null. Now get all tasks. For this we need to implement pagination and filtering. So in this method we have to call one method to implement the filter and other method to implement the sort. Then we have to implement skip and take. Let's first get the query. We pass filter and we will pass true. For is employee, that we need the employee object related to our tasks. Then we have to call sort. We will pass the query, we'll pass the sort object and the direction. Okay, for that we have to generate this method as a private method. Now we call this query, which will return the list of tasks that match this filter. Then we will call this sort function and we will return a new query. Now after that we have to return query dot skip. We have to skip based on page index and page size. Here we have to pass page index multiplied by page size. Then we have to take the page size and then to list. Okay, and now with sort we have the query which is of a queryable of tasks, and we have the sort which could be the name, description, or even assignee, which is the assignee name, and we have the direction. Okay, let's start by switch sort and direction case. Now we are going to use the constants which we have created before. Task constant dot name, which means we are sorting by name, and we need the direction. For the direction we need another constants. So let's go to models and shared models, and we have to create new class. Let's call this shared or direction constants. In this class we have to create two new variables, public const string and public const string Okay, we created these two variables. Now we can use these here. If the sort is by name and the direction, we can use it from here. Direction const dot ask, then return query dot order by name, and by default it's ask. Then break case task now if it's in this direction, return query dot order by descending name. Now case description and direction consts dot ask return query dot order by description, case description and description consts order by descending now case assignee now in this case return query dot order by x. Now we have to check if the employee ID is not null or the employee object is not null. It means if this task is already assigned to an employee. If not equals to null, then x dot employee dot name, otherwise null. And same case, task const dot assign, but in the other direction, then return query dot order. Okay, also so order by x employee not equals to null, then x dot employee name, otherwise null. And we have at last default return query dot order by name. Now let's implement count. Now here we have the filter. So first we have to get the queryable list based on that filter. So our query get query, and we pass the filter, and then we return query dot get count. Okay, now let's go and implement get query. Now for get query we have the filter, and we have is employee parameter. Now first let's check if we need employee or we don't need. Var query if is employee, then dp context dot tasks dot include employee, otherwise dot tasks. We don't need the employee. and this is of iQueryable task. Now after we get the queryable list, we have to implement the filter. Now return query.where now first we have to check now this filter should be content either in name or description, but first we have to check if this filter is null or not null. So if string dot is null or white space for this filter, now first this should not be null or white space, and name dot to lower dot contains filter dot to lower. Now we have to check if this name contains the characters inside this filter. Now or x dot description dot to lower dot contains this now or we have to check for the assignee if it contains this filter. Or but first we have to check if there is an employee assigned to this task. So if x dot employee not equals to null and x dot employee dot name dot to lower dot contains filter dot to lower. So now we are checking first if this filter is not null or white space and the name contains this filter, or the name contains the description, or the employee is not null and employee name contains this filter. Now we need another validation, which is this filter is null or empty. If this filter is null or empty, then we have to return the full list. So in this case, here we have to add one more validation, or string dot is null or white space filter. Okay, now let's implement get task by ID, return db context dot tasks dot find task ID. Okay, but first we have to make sure that we need the employee or not. Now same, if is employee, then return this. Otherwise we have to return dot include dot tasks dot include employee dot where x dot id equals to task id. First one if not employee, then last dot first or default. Now last thing is insert task, db dot tasks dot add task and db.save change, and at last we have to return that task. Now we have finishing implementing the constants, task service and employee service. In the next video we will implement task controller and employee controller, and we will run the project. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to watch my next video.